Hi guys, welcome back to LAPERY'S College of Fashion YouTube sewing channel. Today's video shall be on the analysis of the LAPERY'S Skirt Drafting Method. I'm sure you have seen the video and you probably have some questions on your mind or some areas that needs clarification, and that's the essence of today's analysis. So let's get started. But by the way, have you subscribed? I'm not judging you, but kindly do subscribe, and as you subscribe, hit the notification bell so that I get notified every time we upload video on this channel, and we upload video on this channel weekly. Now, we need to get some stuffs right. First, when we say skirts, we mean a waist downward garment in which the lower length, which is our legs, are enclosed together this way. A waist downward garment. But when we say trouser, we mean a trouser is still a waist downward garment, but here now the lower limbs, our legs, are separated. And when we talk about gowns, dresses, we have the infusion of our bodies, which is the upper torso now, and a skirt to have gowns, to have dresses. But when we say jumpsuit now, is the infusion of our bodies, which is the upper torso, and trouser that will give us jumpsuit. So this skirt pattern that we have drafted is going to be serving two purposes. We are going to be using it to making our skirt, which is from just waist downward, a normal skirt, and we can actually use it to make our gowns by fusing it with our simplified bodies, means which are bodies from shoulder to the waistline. We can fuse it to make our dress. So we need to clear that, and that was why some lines were drawn on this skirt pattern. Another thing we need to get right is to take the measurement for the skirt. Ideally should start from the natural waistline, somewhere here. If you are wearing a formal skirt, it will start from here. And if you have to even tuck in the shirt or the top, of course you wouldn't be doing a low waist and you'll be tucking it. It will not be formal. So ideally, to take our measurement, the skirt length should start from our natural waistline downwards to whatever length that we want. And this actually helps us to be able to fuse our skirts with our simplified bodies to draft our gowns. Let's have a look at this. First, get a tiny rope to be tied around the waistline this way, and most especially let it rest on the back length like this, and let your client adjust so that the rope rests on the natural waistline. Then afterwards, place your tape measure on the rope line and measure your waistline this way. Then we'll go ahead to the hip line, placing your tape measure on the fullest part of the hip this way, and let it go round. Then from this waistline again, you measure the length, which usually ends just on the knee. Skirt pattern are drafted short length. Then from this waist region down to where the hip line is usually around 8 to 10 inches this way. So this method of skirt drafting takes that ideal situation into consideration, and also based on three major premises drawn from the analysis of the human body structure. You can go check that video once again. This is just an example. This is a small scale of the full scale that we did, and I've gone ahead to replicate exact measurements here, and I've also gone ahead to trace it out. So I'll be using this to explain in details the steps that we did and why we actually did those steps. Now, the first thing we did was to draft a box. And the box, this measurement for the box was the skirt length that we used for the length. While the breadth, we actually divided the hip by 2. And we actually added ½ inch ease allowance. Why did we divide hip by 2? From our understanding of the human body structure, the human body structure is such that it can be divided into 2 equal halves. What we have on this side is also what we have on this other side. Likewise, for the back piece, what we have here is also what we have here. Please ignore my artificial bum that I created. It's just for illustration purposes. So ideally, what we have here is also what we should have here. So now, when it comes to pattern drafting, since we understand that what I have here is also what I have here, I do not need to draft the full front. All I need will be half of the front and half of the back piece. And that was why we actually went ahead to be drafting this box using the hip measurement, round hip measurement, dividing it by 2. So that just half of the front and half of the back that we'll be having. And we added ease allowance. The ease allowance is just for enough room for comfort. You understand? So that whatever we draft will not be too fitted, but you just have the fitting. And now by the time we turn it to the side, this is your side seam. This pattern now conforms because this is the center front, this is the center back. If we should slice this body into 2 and spread it out this way, we'll be having our center front here, we'll be having our center back here. And this is what this pattern represents. Center front here, center back here. And now is the side seam. But locating where that side seam is now is where we have to do that calculation, where we have to go back to our table, because we cannot divide this center front and center back into 2 equal halves most times. Like you have here, this frontal part is flat. This is where you have the protrusion because of the buttocks. So we cannot divide into 2. So for us to divide, we need to get the difference between this this hip and the waist measurement. I already have a video on that, on how to divide our bust, waist and hip. If you are yet to view that video, kindly do so that I have a better understanding. So it is the difference here that helps us to be able to know by how many inches this back now will be more than the front piece. So why did we divide into 2? The hip into 2 for the box. I just explained that. So after we divided the hip, we got the width of our box. Then the length of the box was the length of our skirts. Fine. Then the next thing we did was to now divide this into 2, but of course not equally. I just explained that. So having checked our waist and hip difference, we got the value and we went to the LAPERY'S Skirt Drafting Table, which is a guide to skirt perfect fit. And that gave us the difference. And it was that difference that we first took out here on the center back, because the back that is going to be more. We took out that difference, and what we had left was what we divided into 2. And that gave us this side seam line. And when we measured the the back piece was already more than this front piece by the value the table gave us. Hope that is understood. The next thing we did was to come down from the top line by 5 inches, and we label that line as our hip yoke line, usually a preferable line to introduce pockets onto our skirts. If your skirt design is going to be having back pockets of some sort, this is the best line to start the pocket, to infuse whether patch pockets or your welt pocket. This is the best line to fuse it. Again, if your skirt wants to have some fullness, you could actually make a big band skirt for designs like this. But of course, you could come lower than what the speculated 5 inches. But this 5 inches yoke line is just a guideline for us and helps us to also be able to input our grain line on our skirt design. The next thing we did again was to come down from this top line by 8 inches, and we label that line as our upper hip line. And we also came down by 10 inches from the top line, and we label as our lower hip line. Those lines were necessary. Like I said, this skirt pattern, we could use it for our gown. We can also use it for our blouses. If you have a simplified bodice, you can fuse your simplified bodice from here to this upper hip line, and you have your blouse. Because we are coming down by 8 inches, whatever your half length or your back length is, by the time you add this, you already have your blouse. Then the lower hip line now will actually be the proper hip line. And like I explained in the drafting, whatever your actual hip line is, it will automatically fall between these 8 and 10 inches, which helps us to eliminate sharp angles that some skirt pattern usually have. Even if you blend it, it helps us to eliminate. And sometimes people have difficulty in taking their hip line on their clients. So with this method, you don't even need to bother with taking from your waist to hip line. Automatically it will fall in place, and you will eliminate any form of sharpness around the hip region. That was why we had to come down 8 inches as upper hip line, and we also came down 10 inches as our lower hip line. If I'm using this for my blouse, I will end it around here and fuse with my simplified bodice to have my blouse. And if I'm using it to make my dress, I'll fuse it with my bodice and I'll have my dress. And wherever it is my actual hip line is, it will just fall in place. Hope that is gotten as well. The next thing we did again was to come to the waistline. We took our waist measurement and we added dart intake. Now, the width of the dart intake for the back was actually different from that of the front. And why is that so again? The human body is 3-dimensional, and for us to cut piece of fabric to conform, now we usually introduce that. So for me to place this fabric around this dress form, and for it to actually conform to the shape of this dress form, at this waist region now you're already having excesses, so I need to introduce that. And you can see the amount of that I'll need to hold for this to actually conform to the shape of this dress form this way. It is by then that it brings out the real shape. This for the back. Now for the front, since the front is already flat, placing placing fabric this way now, I wouldn't need too much of an excess. This dress form is actually flattened, but on the human form is your thigh that will actually raise it upwards, but your thigh cannot raise as much as your buttocks. So we'll still be having a little bit of an excess. It shouldn't be this flat, but then what we'll have in terms of the excess cannot be as much as that of the back. So usually the front that is smaller in width compared to that of the back piece, because the front already is somewhat flat. So that explains why the width of the dart intake here was wider than that of the front. So having done that, we now connected our waist with our upper hip line, so as not to have any form of sharpness, both front and back. And the LAPERY'S skirt drafting table has actually helped us with the width, the size of our dart intake, so that we do not need to do any form of assumption. Now, the next thing we now did was to go upwards this actual waistline by ½ inch this way, and this is necessary for this pattern to conform with our body, the human body. Usually around our waist region, because we have flesh there, it is flesh, it's not bone, and we usually have folds around this region. So this ½ inch raising up helps us to be able to make this skirt pattern to actually conform, and in a way it's serving as ease lengthwise now, lengthwise, such that our actual length is not in any way shortened, because most time when we sit down you have folds around this region of our waistline. That was the essence of this half-inch raising up. But in a case you are doing a gown and you are fusing your bodies with your skirts, you wouldn't need this half-inch. It will have been fused together, so this will have been eliminated from the pattern. The next thing we now did was to lower the center front, likewise the center back slightly, but the length of the center front now is a bit shorter than the center back. And why is this so? This is also in conformity with body structure. That of the center back was necessary. We didn't actually go straight on, because by the time we'll do the construction of our dart, if you can observe it, having constructed our dart this way, this edge of the center back actually goes up slightly. So if we had made it straight on this way, by the time we'll construct our dart now, what will happen is the center back line will have gone up and making that part to be sharp. It will not have a smooth finishing, and that's why we did that lowering here. But that of the center front now was necessary to conform with body structure. So let's check that out. Take a good look at this, the placement of the rope around the natural waistline all round to the back. Now go ahead and measure the length from the waistline down to the table this way. So I'm having about roughly 12.5 inches. Now I have this fabric which I'm going to be placing round in form of skirts on it, and the length of the fabric is about, this is about 14, roughly 14 inches. Now if I were to sew a skirt with this, I'll be placing it round this way, and of course it will be a bit longer. I'll be having this amount of an excess this way on it. Now this same fabric, now I'm going to go ahead to place it on that of the back piece, and since the natural waistline has been well outlined, they are supposed to have the same length. But because of the buttocks now, the extension of the buttocks now, placing this same fabric round this way, maintaining the same length like so, we'll now observe that this is actually the same length where the rope is, whereas for the front we were still having this, about this amount of an excess, which shows us that because of this buttock, the back piece is longer, and for us to draft a skirt pattern, we are not supposed to have the same length. If not, by the time someone wears it, these buttocks will actually raise the back and will have a similar shortage at the hemline. But with the drafting method that we adopted now, that has been taken care, and that was why we have the center front a bit shorter than the back piece. We later now move to the placement of the dart, and the best location is actually to centralize, so get the middle of the value at the waist and position your darts right. However, the positioning of these darts are subject to movement. Since the emphasis for skirt drafting, the fullness at the back now, is preferable that the dart on this back piece remains like this, even if you have to fuse your skirt pattern with your bodies to make your gown. The back piece of the body is usually flat, not so much emphasis on it, so you can adjust that to suit that of the skirt, the back skirt pattern. When it comes to the front, since the emphasis for the front is on the bodies, where you have the fullness of the bust measurement, and we usually use our nipple to nipple to do the placement of our dart, that remains. So we will be moving this our skirt dart to align with that of the bodies. So when it comes to movement, move your back bodies to suit this skirt pattern. Then for the front, move your front skirt now to suit that of the bodies. I hope you got that without confusion. So that was that about the dart. The next thing we now did was to impute some fitting lines, and which we did at the hemline, at the side seam, and likewise at the center back to tighten it. So we came in by 1 inch on both sides, and we had to link it with the the lower hip line, and that's why we had this lines imputed. And likewise for the center back. At the end of the day, you observe that the hemline, the width of the hemline at this center back will be smaller than that of the center front, because we came in at the side and we also came in at the center back. This is necessary because there's already fullness here at the back piece, and when you want to achieve fitted garments, these fitting lines are for us to be able to achieve fitted garments. So if you want to achieve something fitted now, it will be necessary for you to come inward at the center back and as well as the side seam, because the buttocks will have raised the garment far from the body. Usually on the front piece, your garment will rest well on your lap, touching your body. But for the back piece now, it will only touch around your buttocks area. Below your buttocks area now will be far from your body, from your thigh, because of the fullness of the buttocks. Now, to achieve something fitted to tighten it, it will be necessary to come inward at the center back to give it that fitting. And that's why we came in here. Now, we also drew another line here at the upper part of the waistline here, which is also another tightening. This will be necessary for us to be able to fuse our skirt and bodies together to have our gown. When you're having a dress that does not have any waistline seam, the only place we can tighten will be at the center back. So this was for center back tightening, and that's why we had to put it there. So all you need to do is to understand these lines. It's not in all cases at all times you follow those lines, depending on what you want to use the skirt pattern to achieve per time. We are probably doing an A-line skirt now. You will still follow your straight side seam, not the shaped one at all. But if you want to achieve something fitted, that is when you go for all those fitting lines. I do hope with this explanation you have a better understanding now why we did certain things in the drafting method. And if you still have further questions, you can go ahead to ask your question. Join our Facebook group where we'll be able to meet other fellow designers and be able to rub minds together and throw more light on some other aspects that you might probably be having challenges. Please do share this video. Tell someone else about this channel so that we can all learn together. Don't forget to subscribe. Until my next video, bye for now.
LAPERY College of Fashion, raising professionals.